The sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet afternoon as Cassidy Sullivan ducked behind the general store counter, her heart pounding like a galloping horse. This wasn't the first time her uncle had returned to Ely, Nevada, drunk and dangerous, but today there was something different in his bloodshot eyes, something that made her blood run cold. "Where's that good-for-nothing niece of mine?" Horace Sullivan bellowed, his voice carrying across the empty store. Behind him stood a man Cassidy had never seen before, older, perhaps 50, with cold eyes and hands that twitched nervously at his sides. "Got a gentleman caller for you, girl?" Cassidy gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. At 21, she had spent the last 3 years working herself to exhaustion, keeping the store running after her parents' death, all while fending off her uncle's schemes to get his hands on the family business, the last thing of value her parents had left her. "There you are," Horace slurred when she finally stood, smoothing down her apron with trembling hands. "Been telling Mr. Decker here all about you. He's looking for a wife, and I've decided you'll do just fine." "Uncle Horace, I have no intention of $40, the stranger interrupted, eyeing her like she was merchandise on a shelf. $40 and I'll take her off your hands today." Cassidy's stomach churned. "I am not for sale." "The hell you ain't," Horace growled, advancing toward her. "Your pa owed me money when he died, and I'm collecting my due. Mr. Decker here runs a trading post up north. Needs a woman to cook and clean and warm his bed? You should be grateful it's more than a stubborn girl like you deserves." "My father owed you nothing," Cassidy said firmly, though her voice quavered. "And this store belongs to me." Horace's face darkened. "Not for long. I've got papers." The bell above the door jingled, and all three turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright Nevada sun. Cassidy felt a flush of relief at the sight of a familiar face, Matthew James, one of the cowboys from the Circle M ranch outside town. He wasn't a regular customer, but she'd always noticed him when he came in, with his quiet manner and kind eyes. "Afternoon," Matthew said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes took in the scene before him, Cassidy's pale face, Horace's aggressive stance, and the stranger's calculating gaze. "Everything all right?" "Miss Sullivan?" "This is private business," Horace snapped. "Get your supplies and get out." Matthew didn't move, his eyes fixed on Cassidy. "Miss Sullivan?" Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. "My uncle is attempting to sell me to this man for $40. The cowboy's expression didn't change, but Cassidy saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. He crossed the store in long strides, positioning himself between her and the two men. "That right?" he asked, voice deceptively calm. "She's my kin," Horace insisted. "I got rights." "Not to sell her, you don't," Matthew said. He turned to face Cassidy, his back to the other men. "Miss Sullivan, I've admired you from afar for some time now. Your kindness to everyone who comes through that door. The way you've kept this place running after your loss." He took a deep breath. "I hadn't planned on doing this today, but I'm thinking now might be the right time after all." Cassidy stared at him, confused. What was he doing? Matthew James dropped to one knee in front of her, taking her hand in his. "Cassidy Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The store fell silent. Cassidy couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This man she barely knew beyond polite conversation over purchases of flour and coffee, was proposing marriage? Here? Now? "Are you insane, cowboy?" Horace sputtered. Matthew didn't look away from Cassidy's face. "I'm offering $50, he said loudly, though his eyes told a different story. $50 to her uncle as a bride price, as is proper. $10 more than his offer. Understanding dawned in Cassidy's eyes. This wasn't a real proposal, it was a rescue. Horace wavered, his greedy nature at war with his suspicion. $50, you say? Cash, Matthew confirmed, still looking at Cassidy, but only if the lady accepts. Cassidy, her uncle barked, don't be stupid. You're going with one of them today. Matthew's hand squeezed hers gently. Miss Sullivan, he murmured, I promise I mean you no harm. In that moment, Cassidy made her decision. Between a stranger who saw her as property and a man who, at the very least, saw her as someone worth saving, there was no real choice. "Yes," she said clearly. "I accept your proposal, Mr. James." The look of relief on Matthew's face was genuine as he stood, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a leather pouch. He counted out $50 and handed it to Horace. "Consider your debt paid," he said firmly. "We'll be married by sundown. The lady will need time to gather her things." Mr. Decker, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, shrugged philosophically. "No hard feelings," he said to Matthew. "Just looking for someone to help run the trading post. Getting too old to do it alone." "I'm sure you'll find someone willing," Matthew replied coldly. Horace pocketed the money with a scowl. $50 doesn't cover what I'm owed, but it'll do for now." He jabbed a finger at Cassidy. "Don't think this is over, girl. That store should have been mine." After the two men left, Cassidy sagged against the counter, trembling from head to toe. "Thank you," she whispered. "But you didn't have to. I mean, you don't actually have to marry me. Once they're gone." "Your uncle doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily," Matthew said, replacing his hat. "He'll be back, maybe with papers, maybe with more men. Unless you're spoken for, he'll keep trying." "So this would be a marriage of convenience?" Cassidy asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Matthew looked at her for a long moment. "Let's call it a marriage of necessity for now," he said finally. "But I meant what I said about admiring you, Miss Sullivan. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't respect you." "I barely know you," Cassidy pointed out. "And I barely know you," he agreed with a small smile. "But I'd like to change that, if you'll allow it." Cassidy looked around the store that had been her whole world for 3 years. It was safety and security, but also a prison of responsibility and loneliness. "What about the store?" she asked. "We can figure that out," Matthew said. "But we should move quickly. I wasn't exaggerating about getting married today. Your uncle needs to see it done." "And if I refuse?" Cassidy asked, needing to know she had a choice. "Then I'll help you find another solution," he said simply. "I won't force you into anything, Miss Sullivan, but I do think marriage might be the surest protection right now." Cassidy took a deep breath. "I'll need to close the store and pack some things." Matthew nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "I'll speak to the preacher. Meet me at the church at 5 o'clock? 5 o'clock, she agreed, still not quite believing what she was agreeing to. As Matthew turned to leave, she called after him. "Mr. James? Why did you do this? Really?" He paused at the door. "Because no one should be bought or sold, Miss Sullivan, and because I've wanted to ask you to dinner for nearly a year now, but never found the courage." His smile was gentle. "This wasn't how I imagined finally speaking to you, but I can't say I'm sorry for the opportunity." After he left, Cassidy moved through the store in a daze, gathering her belongings and closing up. By the time the church bells struck 5, she stood before the town preacher in her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother, with only the preacher's wife and the town doctor as witnesses. Matthew looked different, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt. He smiled reassuringly as she approached. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "So am I," he confessed, surprising her. "But we'll figure it out together if you're still willing." Cassidy nodded, and they turned to face the preacher. As she repeated the vows that would bind her to this near stranger, Cassidy Sullivan, soon to be Cassidy James, wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, or if perhaps, just perhaps, this unusual beginning might lead to something she hadn't dared hope for in a very long time. The ceremony was brief, but binding. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Matthew hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Cassidy's lips, her first kiss, and from a husband she barely knew. "I've arranged rooms at the hotel tonight," he told her quietly as they walked out into the evening air. "Tomorrow we'll ride out to the ranch. It's about 2 hours from town." "What about the store?" Cassidy asked, reality crashing back. "We can talk to Jenkins at the bank tomorrow morning," Matthew said. "See about hiring someone to run it for you, or perhaps selling it if that's what you prefer." "I don't know what I prefer anymore," Cassidy admitted. Everything's happening so fast. Matthew stopped walking and turned to face her. I know this isn't how either of us planned our lives to go, Cassidy, but I promise you this: I'll be a good husband. I'll protect you, provide for you, and respect you. And if you never come to feel more for me than gratitude, I'll accept that. His sincerity touched something in Cassidy's heart. Thank you, she said softly. For now, that's all I can ask. They walked the short distance to the hotel, where curious eyes followed them. News traveled fast in a small town like Ely, and by morning everyone would know that the Sullivan girl had married Matthew James from the Circle M in a hasty ceremony. The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Whitley, gave them a knowing smile as she handed over the key. Congratulations to you both, she said cheerfully. A surprise to the whole town, but a pleasant one. We've put you in our best room. Cassidy felt her cheeks burn as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. Matthew unlocked the door to reveal a modestly furnished room with a large bed dominating the space. Awkwardness descended like a heavy blanket. I'll sleep in the chair, Matthew said immediately, setting down Cassidy's small bag. You don't have to, she began, then stopped, unsure what she was offering. I do, he said firmly. This marriage may be legal, but we're still strangers. I won't rush you, Cassidy. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. Thank you. As night fell, they settled into an uneasy routine, both careful not to invade the other's space. Matthew took the chair as promised, while Cassidy lay awake in the too large bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the morning would bring. Matthew, she whispered into the darkness. Yes? I don't regret saying yes today. I just want you to know that. There was a long pause. I'm glad, he finally replied. Get some rest, Cassidy. Tomorrow's a new beginning for both of us. Cassidy turned onto her side, watching the silhouette of her new husband in the moonlight from the window. A new beginning indeed, but one that had started with a lie. Could anything true grow from such a foundation? Only time would tell. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window. Cassidy woke to find Matthew already dressed and seated by the window, a cup of coffee in his hands. Good morning, he said, seeing her stir. I brought you coffee. Thank you. She sat up, embarrassed by her rumpled appearance. I'll need a few minutes to get ready. Take your time, he said, rising. I'll wait downstairs and order us some breakfast. After he left, Cassidy dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a brown calico that had seen better days but would have to do for visiting the bank. She pinned her hair up as neatly as she could without her mirror from home, then joined Matthew downstairs. He was waiting in the hotel dining room, deep in conversation with a man Cassidy recognized as Mr. Jenkins from the bank. Both men stood as she approached. Mrs. James, Jenkins said, testing out her new name. Congratulations on your marriage. Thank you, she replied, still startled by the title. Mr. Jenkins was just passing by, Matthew explained. I mentioned we'd be coming to see him about the store, and he suggested we discuss it now over breakfast. Over plates of eggs and bacon, they discussed the future of Sullivan's General Store. Jenkins confirmed what Cassidy had long suspected: her father had left the business in debt, though not severely. Your diligent management these past 3 years has nearly cleared those debts, Mrs. James, Jenkins said approvingly. But your uncle has been making inquiries about the property, claiming your father promised it to him. My father would never have done that, Cassidy said firmly. I don't doubt you, Jenkins assured her, but with you now married, the situation changes. The store legally becomes part of your husband's property unless other arrangements are made. Cassidy felt a flash of panic. Had she traded one form of control for another? She glanced at Matthew, whose expression remained neutral. I have no interest in taking over Mrs. James's store, Matthew said. We discussed several options last night. Cassidy, what would you prefer? To sell it or keep it running with a manager? The fact that he was asking her opinion, rather than deciding for her, gave Cassidy courage. I'd prefer not to sell it just yet, she said slowly. It was my parents' legacy. Perhaps we could hire someone to manage it for now while I decide what I want long term. A sensible approach, Jenkins agreed. I know a young man, Thomas Wheeler, who's been looking for such an opportunity. He worked for Hanson's Mercantile in Carson City for 5 years before moving here. He's trustworthy and experienced. That sounds promising, Matthew said, looking to Cassidy for confirmation. She nodded, relief washing over her. Yes, I'd like to meet him. Excellent, Jenkins said, rising. I'll arrange it for later today. Now, I should be opening the bank. A pleasure to see you both. And again, congratulations. After he left, Matthew reached across the table to touch Cassidy's hand lightly. Did that satisfy your concerns about the store? Yes, she admitted. I was afraid. That I'd take it from you, he finished quietly. I meant what I said yesterday, Cassidy. I want to help you, not control you. She studied his face, trying to understand this man who had stepped into her life so suddenly. Tell me about yourself, she requested. If we're to be husband and wife, I should know more than your name. Matthew nodded. That's fair. I'm 26. I've worked at the Circle M for 8 years now, started as a ranch hand and worked my way up to foreman. Before that, I was born and raised in Colorado, but came west after my parents died of fever. I have a small cabin on the ranch property. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. I've been saving to buy my own piece of land someday. He hesitated. I've never been married before. Never found the right woman, or maybe never had the courage to ask when I did. There was something in his voice that made Cassidy wonder if he was referring to her. And your family? All gone now, he said. I had a younger sister, but she died alongside my parents. What about you? I know about your uncle, of course, but is there anyone else? Cassidy shook her head. No, just my parents, and they've been gone 3 years now. The store was everything to them and to me after they passed. It's been lonely, but I managed. You did more than manage, Matthew said. Everyone in town speaks highly of how you kept that store running through hard times. His admiration brought a flush to her cheeks. What will your employer think of your sudden marriage? Matthew smiled slightly. Mr. Miller's a fair man. He always said I worked too hard and needed a wife to come home to. I don't think he'll mind, especially once he meets you. They finished breakfast and spent the morning at the store, where Cassidy collected more of her belongings and introduced Matthew to the stock and accounts. By early afternoon, they had met with Thomas Wheeler, who struck Cassidy as capable and honest. They arranged for him to take over management the following day, with a percentage of the profits as payment. Ready to head to the ranch? Matthew asked as they left the store. Cassidy looked back at the building that had been her home and livelihood. I suppose I am. They collected their horses from the livery Matthew's sturdy gelding and a gentle mare he had arranged for Cassidy. As they prepared to leave town, a shout stopped them. Sullivan! Horace's voice rang out across the street. Girl, get over here! Matthew's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip as Horace stumbled toward them, clearly drunk despite the early hour. It's James now, Matthew corrected coldly. Mrs. James. So you went through with it, Horace sneered. Didn't think you had it in you, girl. Spreading your legs for a cowboy instead of an honest businessman. Cassidy flinched at the crude words, but Matthew's calm voice steadied her. Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you watch your language when speaking about my wife. She's no longer your concern. The hell she isn't, Horace spat. That store belongs to me. My brother promised. Your brother left it to his daughter, Matthew interrupted, and now his daughter is my wife. The law is clear on this matter. The store is now in our possession, and we've arranged for its management. There's nothing more to discuss. A small crowd had begun to gather, watching the confrontation with interest. Horace looked around, realizing he was losing face. This ain't over, he threatened, jabbing a finger at Cassidy. You think you're so clever, but I'll get what's mine. Good day, Mr. Sullivan, Matthew said dismissively, turning his horse. Cassidy, shall we? They rode out of town under the curious gazes of the townspeople, Cassidy's heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Only when Ely disappeared behind them did she let out a long breath. Will he cause more trouble, do you think? She asked. Possibly, Matthew answered honestly, but he'll find it harder now that we're legally married and arrangements have been made for the store. He's more bluster than action, from what I can tell. They rode at a comfortable pace through the Nevada landscape, sagebrush stretching to the horizon under a vast blue sky. Matthew pointed out landmarks as they went, telling stories about his years working the rangeland. Cassidy found herself relaxing in his company, drawn to his quiet confidence and gentle humor. "Tell me about the ranch," she requested as they stopped to rest the horses at a small stream. "Circle M's one of the bigger spreads in these parts," Matthew said, helping her down from her horse. "Mr. Miller runs about 2,000 head of cattle, employs 15 men full-time and more during roundup. His wife passed some years back, but his daughter Clara helps run things. She'll be glad to have another woman around." "Will we live in the main house?" Cassidy asked, suddenly nervous about meeting her husband's employer and his daughter. Matthew shook his head. "We have a cabin of our own, about a quarter-mile from the main house. It's small but solid. 2 rooms, a good stove, and a nice porch that catches the sunset." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I'll warn you, it's not much compared to what you're used to." "I lived above a store in 2 small rooms," Cassidy reminded him. "I'm not used to luxury." Matthew smiled. "Still, I'd have fixed it up better if I'd known I was bringing home a wife." "It's your home," Cassidy said. "Now it will be ours." Something warm passed between them at her words. Matthew reached out hesitantly to touch her cheek. "You're remarkable, Cassidy James. Most women would be furious to be rushed into marriage this way." "Most women haven't had to fend off their drunk uncles for 3 years," she replied wryly. "Besides, you saved me. That counts for something." "I don't want your gratitude," he said softly. "At least, not only that." Before she could respond, he pulled his hand away and suggested they continue riding. The moment passed, but Cassidy found herself replaying it as they traveled, wondering at the flutter in her stomach when he had touched her face. They reached the Circle M in the late afternoon. The ranch spread across a wide valley, cattle dotting the pastures and cowboys visible in the distance moving herds. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure with several outbuildings and bunkhouses nearby. As Matthew had described, a small cabin stood a short distance away, smoke curling from its chimney. "I sent word ahead with one of our boys who was in town yesterday," Matthew explained, seeing her surprise at the smoke. "Clara's likely been over to light the stove and prepare things." Sure enough, as they approached the cabin, a woman emerged onto the porch. Clara Miller was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a kind face that broke into a smile at the sight of them. "Matthew James, you sly devil," she called out, "riding into town for supplies and coming home with a wife. You've outdone yourself this time." Matthew grinned, the most relaxed Cassidy had seen him yet. "Clara, this is Cassidy, formerly Sullivan, now James. Cassidy, this is Clara Miller, who knows far too much about me for comfort." Clara came forward to clasp Cassidy's hands warmly. "Welcome to Circle M, Mrs. James. You've caught yourself a good man, though heaven knows why he waited so long to speak up about his feelings." Cassidy glanced at Matthew in confusion, but he was suddenly very interested in unsaddling the horses. "Come inside," Clara continued, leading Cassidy toward the cabin. "I've stocked the pantry and made up the bed with fresh linens. The place needed a woman's touch, but it's sturdy and warm." The cabin was indeed small but well built. A main room contained a table, 2 chairs, a small sofa, and a cooking area with a good iron stove. Through a doorway, Cassidy glimpsed a bedroom with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt. Simple, but far more welcoming than she had expected. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "Matthew built most of the furniture himself," Clara said proudly. "He's handy that way. Wait until you see the rocking chair on the porch, a thing of beauty." Matthew entered carrying Cassidy's bags, looking embarrassed at Clara's praise. "It's just a chair, Clara." "A chair you spent 3 months perfecting," Clara retorted, winking at Cassidy. "Now, I've left stew warming on the stove. Dad expects you both for dinner tomorrow night, but he thought you might want privacy tonight." The meaningful look she gave them made Cassidy blush furiously. After Clara left, promising to return in the morning to help Cassidy get settled, an awkward silence fell between the newlyweds. Matthew cleared his throat. "I hope it's not too disappointing," he said, gesturing around the cabin. "It's not," Cassidy assured him. "It's charming, truly." Relief crossed his face. "Clara exaggerates about the furniture. Winters get long here. I needed something to occupy my hands." "You're talented," Cassidy said, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the table. "My father tried woodworking once. We ended up with a three-legged stool that wobbled dangerously." Matthew laughed, and some of the tension eased. "Are you hungry? Clara's stew is famous around these parts." They ate dinner at the small table, conversation flowing more naturally as they discussed the ranch, the people Cassidy would meet, and the rhythm of life she could expect. As darkness fell, Matthew lit lamps, their golden glow making the cabin feel intimate and cozy. The awkwardness returned, however, when it came time for bed. "I can sleep out here," Matthew offered, nodding toward the sofa, which was clearly too short for his tall frame. Cassidy gathered her courage. "That's not necessary. The bed is large enough for both of us." When his eyebrows rose, she hurried to add, "Just to sleep, I mean. It seems silly for you to be uncomfortable when we're married." Matthew studied her face. "Are you certain?" "I meant what I said about not rushing you." "I'm certain," she said, though her heart was racing. "But I would appreciate time before we truly become husband and wife." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Of course. However long you need, Cassidy." They prepared for bed with careful courtesy, Matthew stepping outside while Cassidy changed into her nightgown. When she was settled under the quilt, he returned, extinguishing all but one lamp before removing his boots and outer clothes, keeping his undershirt and trousers on as he slipped into the bed beside her, careful to maintain distance between them. "Good night, Cassidy," he said softly, blowing out the last lamp. "Good night, Matthew," she whispered into the darkness. Despite the strangeness of sharing a bed with a man she barely knew, Cassidy found herself drifting off quickly, exhausted by the emotional turbulence of the past 2 days. Her last conscious thought was of how different her life had become in just 48 hours, and how strangely right it felt to be falling asleep beside Matthew James. In the deep of night, Cassidy woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. A warm weight around her waist brought reality rushing back in sleep. She and Matthew had gravitated toward each other, his arm now draped protectively over her. His breath was warm against her neck, his body solid against her back. She should move away, she knew, but something kept her still. There was comfort in his unconscious embrace, a security she hadn't felt since her parents died. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Cassidy adjusted her position slightly, settling more comfortably against his chest. Just for tonight, she told herself, closing her eyes. Just for tonight, she would allow herself this closeness. Dawn was breaking when Cassidy next opened her eyes. She was alone in the bed, the sounds of movement coming from the main room. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the cabin. Hurriedly dressing, she emerged to find Matthew at the stove, competently preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," she assured him, self-consciously smoothing her hair. "I'm usually up with the sun. This smells wonderful." "Ranch work builds an appetite," he said, setting plates on the table. "And we start early. I need to check in with the foreman after breakfast, but I thought I might show you around first. Introduce you to some of the folks here." "I'd like that," Cassidy said, taking a seat. As they ate, Matthew outlined the day ahead. "Clara will likely come by mid-morning to help you settle in. Don't let her overwhelm you. She means well, but she can be enthusiastic." "She seems kind," Cassidy observed. "She is," Matthew agreed. "She's been like a sister to me since I came to work here. Her father treats his hands well, especially those who prove themselves loyal." After breakfast, Matthew kept his promise, giving Cassidy a tour of the ranch. They visited the stables, the bunkhouse, where the hands greeted her with respectful nods and curious glances, and the main house, where they met briefly with Charles Miller, the ranch owner. Miller was a hearty man in his 60s with a booming voice and firm handshake. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. James," he said warmly. "My daughter's been talking my ear off about Matthew finally finding himself a wife. We're glad to have you." "Thank you, sir," Cassidy replied. "I appreciate your welcome." "Matthew's one of my best men," Miller continued. "Been trying to convince him to take on more responsibility. Perhaps now that he's settled, he'll consider it." Matthew looked surprised. "Mr. Miller?" "We'll discuss it another time," Miller said with a wave of his hand. "You two are expected for dinner tonight. Clara's planning something special." As they walked back toward their cabin, Cassidy glanced curiously at Matthew. What did he mean about more responsibility? Matthew looked slightly uncomfortable. "He's hinted before about making me ranch manager. His health isn't what it was, and while Clara knows the business side, she doesn't have the same rapport with the hands." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Cassidy said. "Why haven't you accepted?" Matthew was silent for a moment. "Never felt settled enough, I suppose. A man in that position should have roots." "And now you have a wife," Cassidy said softly, understanding dawning. "Roots of a sort." He met her eyes. "I don't want you to think I married you to advance my position, Cassidy." "I don't," she assured him, "but perhaps it's a fortunate consequence." True to Matthew's prediction, Clara arrived mid-morning, bringing with her several women from the ranch wives of other hands and workers from the main house. Under the guise of welcoming Cassidy, they descended on the cabin like a whirlwind, cleaning, rearranging, and offering advice on everything from cooking to keeping a husband happy. By mid-afternoon, Cassidy's head was spinning, but the cabin gleamed, the pantry was organized, and she had been thoroughly educated on the social dynamics of the ranch. When the women finally departed, promising to see her at dinner, Cassidy sank gratefully into the rocking chair on the porch. That was where Matthew found her an hour later, dozing in the warm afternoon sun. He paused, taking in the sight of her hair coming loose from its pins, face relaxed in sleep, one hand tucked under her cheek. Something tightened in his chest. "Cassidy," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She woke with a small gasp, straightening quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep." "No need to apologize," he said, coming up the steps. "Clara's welcoming committee can exhaust even the strongest constitution." Cassidy laughed. "They were very kind, if overwhelming. I learned more about this ranch in 3 hours than I could have in a month on my own." "And probably more about me than I'd care for you to know," Matthew said wryly. "Perhaps," she teased. "They seem to think quite highly of you." "They're biased," he said, though he looked pleased. "We should start getting ready for dinner soon. The Millers keep town hours for meals, not ranch hours." Cassidy nodded, rising from the chair. "I'll change into something more suitable." As they prepared for dinner, moving around each other in the small cabin with increasing comfort, Cassidy found herself watching Matthew covertly. In just 2 days, this man had completely upended her life. Yet she felt safer than she had in years. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that settled her own anxieties. Dinner at the Miller house was a lively affair. Clara had invited several of the senior ranch hands and their wives, creating a celebration of sorts for the newlyweds. Cassidy, initially nervous, found herself relaxing as the evening progressed, drawn into conversations and made to feel welcome. "So tell us how you two finally got together," Clara prompted during a lull in conversation. "Matthew's been sweet on you for ages, but he's never mentioned proposing." Matthew choked on his water, and Cassidy felt heat rise to her cheeks. They hadn't prepared for this question, hadn't discussed what story to tell. "It was rather sudden," Cassidy began carefully. "I'd been working up the courage for some time," Matthew interjected, recovering. "But when I walked into the store yesterday and saw her uncle trying to force her into an unwanted arrangement, something just snapped." He looked at Cassidy, his eyes softening. "I knew I couldn't let her go to another man when I'd been hoping to make her mine for so long." The sincerity in his voice made Cassidy's heart skip. Was he merely playing a part, or was there truth in his words? "How romantic," one of the wives sighed. A rescue and a proposal all at once. Matthew always was the honorable type, another ranch hand commented, though we never expected him to move quite so fast. When you know, Matthew said simply, his eyes still on Cassidy's face. Later, as they walked back to their cabin under a sky filled with stars, Cassidy found the courage to ask what had been on her mind since dinner. "Did you mean what you said, about having feelings for me before yesterday?" Matthew was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "Yes," he admitted. "I've noticed you every time I came into town, watched how kind you were to everyone, even those who could barely afford to buy anything. How you worked so hard after your parents passed." He looked down. "I planned to ask you to a dance or dinner someday, but never found the right moment, or perhaps the right courage." "Oh," Cassidy breathed, genuinely surprised. "I know our marriage began as a way to protect you," Matthew continued, "and I meant what I said about giving you time. But I hope you know that for me, it wasn't entirely selfless." He met her eyes. "I've wanted to know you better for a long time, Cassidy Sullivan. Now I have that chance, even if the circumstances aren't what I would have chosen." The honesty in his confession touched her deeply. Before she could second-guess herself, Cassidy rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered, "and thank you for saving me, Matthew James." His eyes darkened, and for a moment Cassidy thought he might pull her closer, might turn her innocent kiss into something more. Instead, he offered his arm to continue their walk home. "We should get back," he said, voice rougher than before. "Early start tomorrow." As days turned into weeks, Cassidy settled into ranch life with surprising ease. The rhythm of dawn to dusk work suited her, not so different from running the store. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove, tended a small garden Clara helped her start, and gradually turned the simple cabin into a home. Matthew rose before sunrise each day to work with the cattle, returning mid-morning for a brief meal before heading back out until evening. Despite his long hours, he always made time to talk with Cassidy, sharing stories of his day and asking about hers. Each night, they shared the bed, maintaining a careful distance that nonetheless seemed to shrink as the days passed, often waking tangled together in the morning light. They were building something, Cassidy realized, not the passionate romance of novels, but something perhaps more lasting, a partnership based on respect and growing affection. She found herself watching for Matthew's return each day, taking pleasure in preparing meals he enjoyed, listening for his laugh when she told him about her misadventures, learning ranch ways. One evening in late June, about a month after their hasty wedding, Matthew returned later than usual, his face grim. "What's wrong?" Cassidy asked immediately, setting aside the shirt she'd been mending. "Your uncle's in town," Matthew said without preamble. "One of the boys spotted him at the saloon, making noise about you in the store." Cassidy's stomach knotted. "What sort of noise?" "Claims he has papers proving your father promised him the store," Matthew said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Says he's going to challenge our marriage as fraudulent." "Can he do that?" Cassidy asked, voice small. "No," Matthew said firmly. "Our marriage is legal and binding. But he could cause trouble with the store if he does have some kind of document, forged or otherwise." He crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her and taking her hands. "We should ride into town tomorrow, speak with Jenkins at the bank and check on things." Cassidy nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "You'll come with me?" "Of course," he said, squeezing her hands. "You're my wife, Cassidy. I protect what's mine." There was a possessiveness in his voice that should have alarmed her, but instead sent a thrill through her body. In that moment, looking into his concerned eyes, Cassidy realized a fundamental truth that had been building for weeks. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization must have shown on her face because Matthew's expression changed, his gaze dropping to her lips. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward. When their lips met, it wasn't the chaste kiss of their wedding day, but something deeper, more yearning. Cassidy's hands came up to frame his face as she responded with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Matthew rested his forehead against hers, breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" she asked. "I was waiting for you," he said simply. "Waiting for you to want it too." Cassidy stroked his cheek, feeling the day's stubble beneath her fingers. "I do want it," she whispered. "I want you, Matthew." His eyes darkened at her words. This time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation, only hunger. He pulled her from the chair into his arms, holding her as if she were precious and desired all at once. That night, they became truly husband and wife, discovering each other with tender exploration and building passion. Cassidy, nervous at first, found herself swept away by Matthew's gentle guidance and obvious reverence for her body. In his arms, she felt beautiful, cherished, and utterly safe. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with her head on his chest, Cassidy traced idle patterns on his skin. "I never imagined it would be like that," she admitted. Matthew pressed a kiss to her hair. "Like what?" "So complete," she said, struggling to find the right words. "Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." His arms tightened around her. "I feel the same way," he murmured. "From the moment I saw you in that store, something in me recognized something in you. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly." "We didn't exactly follow the conventional path," Cassidy said with a small laugh. "No," he agreed, "but I wouldn't change how we got here, not if it meant losing what we found." Cassidy raised herself on one elbow to look at his face in the moonlight, streaming through the window. "Neither would I," she said softly, leaning down to kiss him again. Morning came too soon, but with it a new ease between them. They moved around each other, preparing for the trip to town with casual touches and shared smiles. The awkwardness of previous weeks completely dissolved. The ride to Ely took on a more serious tone as they discussed what to do about Horace. "If he does have some kind of document, even a forged one, it could cause legal complications," Matthew explained. "We should speak with a lawyer as well as Jenkins." Cassidy nodded, anxiety building as the town came into view. "What if he tries to cause a scene like last time?" "Then I'll handle it," Matthew said grimly. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Their first stop was the general store, where Thomas Wheeler greeted them warmly. "Mrs. James, Mr. James, a pleasure to see you both. The store's been doing well. I've kept detailed accounts, as requested." While Cassidy reviewed the books with Thomas, Matthew asked casually about Horace. "Been in town 3 days now," Thomas confirmed. "Staying at the hotel, spending most of his time at the saloon. Been asking questions about the store and your marriage, nothing too direct, but people notice." "Has he caused any trouble here?" Matthew asked. "Came by yesterday." "Demanded to see the ownership papers," Thomas said. "I told him they were with the bank, which seemed to satisfy him for the moment." After ensuring the store was running smoothly, they made their way to the bank. Jenkins ushered them into his office immediately. "I was hoping you'd come," he said without preamble. "Your uncle visited yesterday with a document he claims is a promissory note from your father, Mrs. James. It states that in exchange for a loan of $500, the store would revert to Horace Sullivan in the event of your father's death." Cassidy gasped. "That's impossible. My father would never have agreed to that, and Horace never had $500 to loan anyone." Jenkins nodded. "I thought as much. The document looks suspicious. The signature doesn't quite match your father's on our records. But it's close enough that it could cause legal difficulties if he pursues it." "What do you suggest?" Matthew asked, his hand finding Cassidy's and squeezing reassuringly. "Speak with Judge Wilson," Jenkins advised. "He's in town today holding court. He can examine the document and potentially rule it invalid if the forgery is obvious enough." They thanked Jenkins and were preparing to leave when the bank door burst open, revealing Horace Sullivan, red-faced and belligerent. "There you are," he slurred, pointing at Cassidy. "Thought you could hide out at that ranch, did you? Thought you could steal what's rightfully mine?" Matthew stepped protectively in front of Cassidy. "Mr. Sullivan, this is neither the time nor the place for this conversation." The hell it isn't, Horace growled. I've got papers proving that store belongs to me. Your fancy marriage won't change that. If you have legitimate concerns, we can discuss them with the judge, Matthew said evenly. But not while you're drunk and making a scene. Horace lunged forward, but Matthew was faster, sidestepping and using Horace's momentum to push him back toward the door. That's enough, Matthew said, voice dangerously low. Leave now, or I'll have the sheriff escort you out. This ain't over, Horace spat, but he backed toward the door. I'll see you both at the judge's office. We'll see who's in the right then. After he stumbled out, Jenkins shook his head. He's been like that since he arrived. The sheriff's already had to calm him down twice. They found Judge Wilson at the courthouse, a small building that served multiple functions in the modest town. The judge, a stern man with shrewd eyes, listened carefully as they explained the situation. I've already seen the document in question, Wilson said. Mr. Sullivan brought it to me yesterday, demanding action. He studied Cassidy. You're certain your father never made such an agreement? Absolutely certain, Cassidy affirmed. My father kept meticulous records of all debts and transactions. There was never any loan from my uncle, quite the opposite, in fact. Uncle Horace frequently borrowed money from my parents. The judge nodded thoughtfully. The signature is questionable, and the paper itself seems newer than the date would suggest. He made a decision. I'll hold a formal hearing tomorrow morning. Both parties should be present with any supporting documents or witnesses. Until then, the store remains under your management, Mrs. James. As they left the courthouse, Matthew suggested they stay in town overnight. We can get a room at the hotel. Be fresh for the hearing tomorrow. Cassidy agreed, though the thought of being in the same building as her uncle made her uneasy. They secured a room at the hotel, then visited the lawyer Jenkins had recommended, who agreed to represent them at the hearing. The town felt different to Cassidy now, no longer her home, but a place filled with memories both good and bad. As they walked past the store where she had spent most of her life, she felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and relief. Do you miss it? Matthew asked, noticing her expression. Parts of it, she admitted. I miss my parents most of all. The store was my connection to them. She looked up at him. But I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss being afraid of what would happen if business was slow or if Uncle Horace came around. Matthew wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together, and afterward, we'll go home. Home. The word filled Cassidy with warmth. Not the store, not anymore. Home was a small cabin on the Circle M with Matthew. That evening, they dined at the hotel restaurant, aware of curious eyes watching the hastily married couple who had become the subject of town gossip. Cassidy held her head high, Matthew's steady presence beside her, giving her courage. They were finishing their meal when Horace entered, accompanied by two men Cassidy didn't recognize. He spotted them immediately, making his way to their table, despite the hotel owner's attempt to intercept him. Enjoying spending my money? He sneered, swaying slightly on his feet. We've nothing to discuss until the hearing tomorrow, Matthew said firmly. Please leave us to our meal. So high and mighty now, Horace continued as if Matthew hadn't spoken. But I remember when you were just a scared little girl hiding behind the counter. Your pa was weak, just like you. Too soft to make real money from that store. Cassidy felt anger rise in her chest. My father was a good man who cared about this town and the people in it. That's more than you've ever been. Horace's face darkened. You watch your mouth, girl. Tomorrow that judge will see the truth, and you'll be out on your ear. He leaned down, whiskey fumes washing over them. Maybe then your cowboy husband won't want you anymore. What good's a wife with nothing to bring to the marriage? Before either could respond, the sheriff appeared, placing a hand on Horace's shoulder. That's enough, Sullivan. You're disturbing the peace again. Come along quietly now. Horace shrugged off the hand but backed away. See you tomorrow, he threatened before allowing himself to be led out. The encounter left Cassidy shaken, old fears resurfacing. Back in their hotel room, she paced anxiously. What if he convinces the judge? What if he does have some kind of legal claim? Matthew caught her hands, stilling her movement. Cassidy, look at me. When she met his eyes, he continued, even if, and it's a big if he somehow wins the store, nothing changes between us. You understand that, right? I didn't marry you for the store. I know, she said, but it was my parents' legacy. It's all I have left of them. Not all, Matthew corrected gently. You have their values, their kindness, their strength. I see it in you every day. He pulled her close. Besides, I've been thinking about this situation. If your uncle is truly this desperate for money, perhaps there's another solution. What do you mean? We could offer to buy him out, Matthew suggested. I have some savings, and if Mr. Miller follows through on his offer of making me ranch manager, we'd have a steady income. We could pay Horace a sum to relinquish any claimed rights to the store, then sell it properly if that's what you want, or continue to have Thomas manage it. Cassidy considered the idea. He might agree to that. Money has always been his weakness. She looked up at Matthew. But your savings that was for your own land someday, I couldn't ask you to use it for this. Matthew smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Our land, Cassidy, our future, and this is part of securing that future, putting your uncle's threats behind us once and for all. Cassidy rose on her toes to kiss him, overcome with gratitude and love for this man who had changed her life so completely. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For what, he asked. For seeing me as a partner, not a burden. For giving me choices instead of making them for me. Matthew's arms tightened around her. Always, he promised. The night was long, anxiety about the coming hearing making sleep elusive, but there was comfort in facing the uncertainty together. In the quiet conversations they shared in the darkness and the reassurance of Matthew's arms around her. Morning arrived with clear skies and a sense of determination. They dressed carefully, Cassidy in her best dress, Matthew in the suit he'd worn for their wedding. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, met them for breakfast to review their strategy one final time. The burden of proof is on your uncle, Patterson explained. If the judge suspects forgery, he'll likely rule in your favor, but be prepared for some difficult questions and accusations. When they entered the courthouse at 9 o'clock, it was already crowded. News of the dispute had spread through town, drawing curious onlookers eager for drama. Horace sat at one table with a thin, nervous-looking man Patterson identified as a lawyer from Carson City. Judge Wilson called the proceedings to order, outlining the case for those present. We are here to determine the validity of a document purporting to transfer ownership of Sullivan's General Store to Horace Sullivan upon the death of James Sullivan. Mr. Horace Sullivan claims this transfer was in exchange for a loan of $500 made in 1866. Mrs. Cassidy James, née Sullivan, disputes the existence of this loan and the authenticity of the document. For the next hour, both sides presented their cases. Horace's lawyer produced the document in question, along with testimony from one of the men who had been with Horace at the hotel, claiming to have witnessed the original transaction. Under Patterson's cross-examination, however, the witness's story began to unravel. His timeline inconsistent with known facts about James Sullivan's whereabouts in 1866. When it was their turn, Patterson called Cassidy to testify. Feeling all eyes on her, she spoke clearly about her father's careful business practices, his detailed record-keeping, and the absence of any mention of such a significant loan. Furthermore, she added, my uncle has shown no interest in operating the store himself. His only concern has been extracting money from it, first through me and now through this claim. Patterson then called Thomas Wheeler, who testified about Horace's previous attempts to intimidate Cassidy before her marriage, including the incident where he had tried to sell her to Mr. Decker. This revelation caused a stir in the courtroom. Judge Wilson frowned deeply, looking at Horace with new disapproval. Is this true, Mr. Sullivan? Did you attempt to sell your niece to another man? Horace shifted uncomfortably. That's not how it happened. I was helping her find a husband is all. Girl needed someone to take care of her. She was managing the store successfully on her own, the judge observed. It seems she was taking care of herself quite adequately. The hearing continued with examination of the disputed document. A local teacher, who had once received letters from James Sullivan, confirmed that the signature looked different from those she had seen. The paper itself, when closely examined, showed signs of being newer than its purported date. As the evidence mounted against Horace, his face grew increasingly red with anger. When Judge Wilson finally called a brief recess to consider his decision, Matthew leaned close to Cassidy. "It's going well," he whispered. "The judge doesn't believe him." Cassidy nodded, though her stomach remained knotted with tension. "I just want this to be over." When court resumed 30 minutes later, Judge Wilson didn't keep them waiting. "Having examined the evidence presented, I find the document claiming to transfer ownership of Sullivan's General Store to Horace Sullivan to be of questionable authenticity at best and likely fraudulent." He looked sternly at Horace. The store legally belonged to Cassidy Sullivan until her marriage, at which point it became joint property with her husband, Matthew James. Mr. Sullivan has no claim to the establishment. Relief washed over Cassidy in a dizzying wave. She gripped Matthew's hand tightly as the judge continued. "Furthermore, I find Mr. Horace Sullivan's conduct toward his niece deeply troubling. The attempt to effectively sell her to another man borders on criminal behavior. Mr. Sullivan, you would do well to leave this town and not trouble these people further." Horace stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a sham. You're all against me." He pointed accusingly at Cassidy. "You think you've won, but this ain't over. That store should have been mine." The sheriff moved toward him, but Horace stormed out before he could be apprehended, his lawyer hurrying after him with an apologetic glance toward the judge. "I apologize for your uncle's behavior, Mrs. James," Judge Wilson said. "Rest assured, your ownership of the store is secure. I'll have the clerk provide you with documentation confirming this ruling." Outside the courthouse, well-wishers surrounded them, townspeople who had known Cassidy all her life expressing their support and congratulations. Thomas Wheeler assured them the store would continue to run smoothly under his management, and Jenkins from the bank suggested they discuss future plans for the business when emotions weren't running so high. Through it all, Matthew remained at Cassidy's side, his quiet strength anchoring her amid the flurry of activity. When they finally had a moment alone, walking toward the hotel to collect their things before heading back to the ranch, he pulled her into a side alley and kissed her soundly. "You were magnificent in there," he said when they broke apart. "So strong, so clear." Cassidy smiled up at him, feeling truly free for the first time in years. "We won," she said wonderingly. "The store is ours. My parents' legacy is safe." "What do you want to do with it?" Matthew asked. "We could continue as we are, with Thomas managing it, or consider selling if you prefer." Cassidy considered the question. "I think I'd like Thomas to continue managing it for now. It provides a good service to the town, and it's part of who I am, but I don't need to be there every day anymore." She touched Matthew's face gently. "My life is with you now, at the ranch." The love in his eyes made her heart swell. "Are you certain? I know how much that store meant to you." "It meant safety and survival when I needed it," Cassidy explained. "But you've shown me there can be more to life than just surviving. With you, I'm living, Matthew. Really living." He gathered her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I love you, Cassidy James. Have since the moment I saw you standing up to your uncle and that stranger." "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right and true on her lips. "Thank you for proposing that day, even if it was just to save me." "Best impulsive decision I ever made," he said with a grin. "Now, shall we go home?" Home. Yes, Cassidy thought as they rode out of Ely later that afternoon. Not the store where she had grown up, but the small cabin on the Circle M, with the man who had changed her life with a desperate proposal and then shown her what love could truly be. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Matthew accepted Mr. Miller's offer to become ranch manager, which came with an increase in pay and responsibility. Cassidy blossomed in her role as his wife, making friends among the ranch families and finding her place in the community. Weekly reports from Thomas showed the store continuing to prosper under his management. As autumn painted the Nevada landscape in golds and reds, Cassidy shared news of her own with Matthew. Standing on their porch one evening as the sun set in a blaze of color, she took his hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she told him, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he repeated, pulling her into his arms with gentle reverence. "Our baby." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land they now called home, Cassidy marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few short months. From a lonely storekeeper living in fear of her uncle's next appearance to a beloved wife, soon-to-be mother, and part of a community that valued her. All because a cowboy had walked into her store on a fateful day and offered an outrageous proposal instead of allowing her to be sold like merchandise. A proposal that had begun as protection, but blossomed into the deepest love she could have imagined. When spring arrived the following year, Cassidy gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after her father. Matthew held the tiny boy with tears in his eyes, vowing to be the kind of father his son would be proud of. "He's perfect," Matthew whispered, sitting beside Cassidy on their bed. "Just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Cassidy observed, touching the baby's downy head. "And hopefully your steady nature." "And your courage," Matthew added, "your determination." Life settled into new rhythms around the baby. Matthew continued to excel as ranch manager, earning the respect of the hands and Mr. Miller's complete trust. Cassidy found joy in motherhood while still maintaining her connection to the store through monthly visits to town. On one such visit, when James was nearly a year old, they received unexpected news. Thomas Wheeler, now engaged to the schoolteacher, wished to buy the store outright. "I've saved nearly enough for a fair offer," he explained earnestly. "This place has become my life these past 2 years, and with a wife soon, I'd like to make it truly mine." Cassidy and Matthew exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. "We'd need to discuss the details," Matthew said, "but in principle, I think we're open to the idea." That night, back at their cabin with James sleeping peacefully in his crib, they talked about what selling the store might mean. "Are you truly comfortable with this?" Matthew asked. "It's been in your family for so long." Cassidy nodded, surprised at her own certainty. "It feels right. Thomas loves the store the way my father did. He'll carry on that legacy of caring for the town." She squeezed Matthew's hand. "And the money from the sale, we could use it to buy that piece of land you've had your eye on. Build our own place, our own legacy." Matthew's eyes lit with excitement. "You'd want that? To have our own ranch someday?" "I would," Cassidy said. "For us, for James, and for any other children we might have. A place of our own, built with love from the ground up." 2 years later, on a bright summer day, the James family stood on a hill overlooking their new home. The house was modest but solid, built by Matthew with help from friends from the Circle M. Around it stretched 200 acres of good grazing land, purchased with the proceeds from the store and their savings from Matthew's years as ranch manager. 4-year-old James ran excitedly ahead, eager to explore, while Cassidy held their second child, 2-year-old Emma, on her hip. Her free hand rested on her belly, where a third child was just beginning to make its presence known. "What do you think?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Is it everything you hoped for?" Cassidy looked at the house, at their son's joyful exploration, at the land that stretched before them full of promise. Then she looked at her husband, this man who had saved her in more ways than he knew. "It's more," she said softly. "So much more than I ever dared to hope for." Matthew kissed her then, beneath the vast Nevada sky, on the land that was now truly theirs. From a desperate proposal born of necessity had grown a love that had transformed both their lives, giving them a family, a home, and a future filled with possibility. As evening fell and they sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the stars appear one by one, Cassidy thought of how drastically her life had changed that day in the store when her uncle had tried to sell her to a stranger, and a cowboy had intervened with a proposal instead. What had begun as an act of protection had become the greatest gift of her life, a love strong enough to build a future on, a love that had shown her the difference between merely surviving and truly living. And as Matthew's arm tightened around her shoulders, as their children slept safely inside the home they had created together, Cassidy James knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the man she was meant to love.